Welcome to Season 8 of Radio Free 501c, brought to you by Rogue Tulips Consulting. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us. We're in Season 8 and we still have a lot to talk about. Radio Free 501c is supported by USAE News, the weekly community newspaper of associations, CVBs, and hotels. Learn more at usaenews.com. Hey there, welcome to our wrap-up of our 2026 celebration of AANHPI month. We're welcoming Diana Lee Tucker. She's founder and president of Great Measure Strategies. She's also a first-time guest, and she's here to drop some knowledge on the 8th measure of success, commit to people. It's Monday, June 1st, 2026. Welcome to episode 330. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the first day of June. I know, can you believe it? We're almost halfway through the year already. It's flown by. Hopefully, you're having a good time here on planet Earth, wherever you are. And I want to thank you for taking some of your time this week to join us here at Radio Free 501c for this week's episode. We have a great conversation. It's something some of us think about, but probably not enough. And I'm very happy to welcome a first-time guest this week. But before I do that, let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Cecilia Sepp. I'm your host here at Radio Free 501c. And this podcast is supported by my company, Rogue Tulips Consulting, and our podcast partner, USAE News. Check out their website at usaenews.com and learn more about their subscription options. So thanks, USAE News. And I'm also very pleased that this week's episode is our closing episode for our 2026 series celebrating AANHPI month. And I'm always very pleased to work with this group at ASAE. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that group and what they do to contribute to the association management profession. And our topic this week is the 8th measure of success, commitment to people. And that is what my guest, Diana Tucker, is here to talk about. This week, it's one of those things we all think about, but like I said, we probably don't do enough work in that area. So Diana, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to say hello to the audience and tell us a little about yourself?
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Hello, everyone. I'm Diana Lee Tucker. I'm founder and president of Great Measure Strategies. We provide C-level fractional executive and consulting services for associations. We bridge we bridge strategy and execution by building and operationalizing scalable structural systems that are aligned with and inclusive of internal and external team members. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today, Cecilia, about that intersection between systems and people. And also, I'm chair of the AANHPI Association Community Group with ASAE. So thank you very much, Cecilia, for always being such a great ally to our community and hosting us on Radio Free 501c3, because it's tremendous to be able to have that support, because that's something that we in our community are very much focused on, is building our community for all AANHPI professionals, whether in associations and nonprofits, because we want to engage and elevate our members in visibility, in our influence, and in our leadership. And so we're here to support and advance our connections and our careers through networking and mentoring and knowledge sharing. And so it's wonderful to have your support, Cecilia, in helping us build our visibility.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm always glad to help out. And I was very pleased when Joanna Panetta reached out a couple of years ago and said, hey, we're doing this podcast tour for AANHPI month. Do you want to be part of it? And I'm very glad to do that because we need to shine a light on everyone in our community and make sure that everybody sees who's here and that we are a very diverse group of people with lots to bring and share. So I'm always glad to do this. And one other thing before we dive into the topic, Diana, you recently were named to the ASAE Fellows Program, were you not?
Yes, thank you very much, Cecilia. I'm very pleased and honored to be joining that group of peers in the association community.
Well, that's wonderful. Congratulations. And I think it's representative of all the work you've done with the CAE Commission and with the AANHPI group. So I'm very happy for you, and
Thank
that's
you.
a great acknowledgement for your efforts. So let's move on, though, to our topic, because I'm sure everybody is curious to hear what you have to say. So you're talking about the eighth measure of success. Now, for those of us in the association management profession, we know that's something of a reference to ASAE's guide, The Seven Measures of Success. And when you look up the seven measures of success, and I'm not going to read all of them for the audience, it's a great Google search, but it mentions people twice. Once, customer service. We want to have good customer service, of course, and member service. And then alliance building. So, out of those seven measures, there's two that talk about people. None of them talk about our staff, our team, those people that we go out, recruit, work hard to retain, and want to educate and keep vibrant and committed to the organization. So, if the eighth measure of success is commitment to people, how could we integrate that?
So thank you. I totally believe that seven measures of success is really a great, solid set of principles and shared language about organizational success. I think it leaves open an opportunity to address what could be an overlaying measure that is, what are we doing for ensuring the psychological safety of our people? Are we creating a workplace culture in which our own team members feel like they thrive? And I think about conversations I had, not too long ago when I was seeking out examples of associations with reputations of having these great workplaces. And there were very few that our peers could readily identify. And I want to be clear that that's not to say that they don't exist, but again, the reputation for being a great workplace wasn't visible either. So there's a gap in what, you and I are seeing among our own community, but it's also, made me think about, you know, I've been in associations for a few decades. So I started out in the 90s, and I think about these 90s cultural references like the movie Office Space and the comic strip Dilbert, right? And so they very much illustrate that it's workplaces are these soulless entities that drain you, and you're there just to fulfill your job. And then it makes me think, well, gosh, we're 3 decades later, and have we moved forward in this? Are we still accepting that workplace, right? And I think, Cecilia, in your work, you're also seeing and hearing that the next generation of the workforce, the cohorts coming in or have recently entered, don't hold those same expectations of what a job means. And so I think that they will look around, and if they're seeing what, I've been seeing and that you're seeing, they might not stay. We might lose them. And then what is that story that we're telling to those future generations? Like, come work in this association profession now, and again, you and I have both been in this space for so long, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't love it. And so it's like, gosh, how can we convey that to people who are looking for, coming out of school, looking for a profession? And it's like, well, the workforce is just going to be shrinking, right? The populations are just shrinking in general. So it is more competitive. So how can we stay competitive? This is an area where we can actually carve out a space if we build awareness and create those workplaces where people want to be.
And I think that's an excellent summary of what's been going on, especially since the 90s. And thanks for the laugh, because I haven't seen Office Space for a long time,
Right.
which is a pretty funny movie. And I love to talk about pop culture because we convey lessons in our stories. And my favorite quote from Dilbert is, "It doesn't matter how much you care, the pay's the same." I may have flipped a little bit. It may be the pay's the same no matter how much you care.
Right.
And that's true to a certain extent. Yet still in the employer mindset, what we want is people who will just basically work themselves to death for the same amount of money and no recognition, no support, no warm fuzzies. I think too much of work in the office is the cold pricklies, if we remember our introduction to psychology class, too much punishment, not enough reward. And I think what we're seeing is the younger people, the next generations, we all start to say, "Oh, well, those young people, blah, blah, blah." But the world is shifting. There's moments in human history where things shift dramatically. And whether it's society is upended and reformed because of something like the Black Death or a natural disaster, or just people thinking differently, we're at another one of those tipping points where the world is pushing back against the fact that it is changing. Things are falling away. The world as we knew it is disappearing. And yet we're desperately trying to hang on to that brick and mortar mindset in a virtual world. And I just keep saying to people, hey, guess what? It's the 21st century. You can turn a movie on and off whenever you want to, like you have choices. And I think that's what we're seeing is we're seeing this new mindset in the next generation of employees. And I think if anybody actually saves the world, it's going to be the people coming behind Gen X and the millennials, because they're going to do all the stuff we talk about. We talked about saving the world for decades, and yet, we're kind of like the people in the movie The Big Chill who become very successful and have a lot of money. And the Tom Berenger character says it's a good thing none of it means anything to us, the money. So
Right.
it's really, I think we had several generations of talking and poorly communicated expectations, whereas like we're seeing people, they're doing things differently, and it seems a little professionally feral sometimes if you came up through that old model. But I think what they're saying is, I'm a person, I'm a human being, and I want to be treated that way. And if you don't treat me that way, I'm going to vote with my feet and leave. And do you think that's why we've seen so much ghosting of job interviews and even ghosting when a person's actually given the job, they just don't show up?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and and I, the the Emily Post in me makes me like say, God, good gosh, you should never ghost. That's just so impolite, right?
Yeah.
And give some people some courtesy. So, I would never agree with ghosting, but then again, to that Dilbert comic, that the particular message that you remember that still you retain in your memory is they're signifying that they're not recognizing, or they recognize that they might not be valued in the way that they feel they should be valued. So they are just stepping aside and moving on. And I think when you brought up the big cultural phenomenon, like the Black Death and things like that. Well, COVID was just a few years ago, and COVID reset all of our expectations, and we realized mental health, well-being is a real priority that we have been compromising for many years. And here, this COVID, as devastating as it was, this was a discovery that gave us an opportunity to address who we are. And seven measures, there's another part of the gap that seven measures illuminates is that you can be considered a success. Your association and your leadership is still considered a success regardless of the type of culture or employee well-being that you nurture. And that's what I'd like to have us explore as a profession, as leaders in our profession, is to say, is that something that we want to just accept? And if not, well, let's make that an equal measure of success, that we are building these workplaces that have psychological safety for our team members, right? That they feel seen and heard and valued. Because when you do that, that's when you have that, it contributes to building that sense of belonging that we all want, right? And we talk about that for our own members, for our vendor partners, for our alliance partners, right? We're changing, we're transitioning from the transactional, right? Here's the membership dues, or here's your sponsorship fee. And we're saying, no, we're moving to a relational, and transformationally relational engagement. Well, why wouldn't we do that for our own staff members, for our own team members? Why wouldn't we want to create that engagement, that sense of belonging that we're trying to do for our members, for the people who are the lifeblood of our own association? And so it's just something that hasn't really been illuminated as much because, again, we just grew up in different times, and now the generational expectations and preferences are making us think about it, I think,
And
because if they don't come in, then we're maybe defeating ourselves. Like, great, we're wonderful leaders and have wonderful, successful associations today, but there's no one to continue it for tomorrow.
oh, yes, all excellent points again. And I think you've really revealed a lot of things that I think about, which is we talk a good game. We use words like empowering your staff and having a positive culture. But what people don't realize is those things take work and they're a certain level of risk. If you're a leader and you're willing to empower the people on your team, you're letting go of some of your power. And that's unsettling. That requires a very confident person who is really comfortable with themselves enough to say, hey, go ahead. You can do it. And you just tell me what happened after you do it. And that's a very different way of thinking because we are still human beings were born into a hierarchical society. And what I mean by that is we were born into the tribal system. So all over the world, people lived in groups, which we called tribes, and you had to work together to survive. And there was a certain level of hierarchy in that mindset because groups of people working together to survive and hopefully thrive had a leader or maybe a council. So we've kind of started out with that. And I don't think we've ever really, as humanity overall, sat down and thought about that and said, why are you still hanging on to this hierarchical thing when education is everywhere, information's freely available, we all can communicate instantly, we're gathering in informal groups more and more, we're able to organize things via social media. We see a lot of the young people, like teenagers. When I say young people, I'm thinking teenagers, high school kids, and they're doing like a lot of what used to be called flash mobs in the
Yeah.
90s, or some of them they call swarming because they just all show up somewhere and nobody is prepared for it. Some of it turns violent, but it seems mostly just like, hey, let's all just go to this park, and then chaos ensues because there's just a lot of people there. And that's what young people do, and that's fun and different. But look at the power they already know they have. They can just post something on social media, whatever one they're using, and say, hey, we're all going to be at this park at 12 noon. And then like 500 kids show up. And that's really a powerful thing to know you have that ability to say, show up, and people do. And I think it's also people want to connect and they want to be in a group and they want to be where the action is. They don't want to miss out on what happens. And I think while we think about those things for our members, again, as you've said so well, we don't think about it for our staff. And I think looking at that as an eighth measure of success, I think the seven measures of success are a very good outline for an organization to follow, except for that missing part. Where's the part about our team? And it's one of the threads, you got me thinking about this again too, Diana. One of the threads I've seen over my career is associations spend a lot of time recruiting really good staff, high talented people with a lot of experience or specific unique knowledge, and then they don't listen to them, but they'll hire an outside consultant who will tell them the same thing, and they'll do it because the outside, and it's like, but you have this huge brain trust right in your team. And that would be a great thing to work on to build that better culture and build that psychological safety. And you mentioned psychological safety, which is a huge part of what we need to do in today's world is people need to feel comfortable and be comfortable talking to each other. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is how do you define psychological safety for the organizations you work with or for yourself? And then what is some advice you could share about how you can build it for your own team?
So I consider psychological safety is an environment in which people have a sense of comfort, a comfort in that they can be authentic and bring their, whole selves. And I know that that is an expression that you've heard about. And I want to ground that a little bit to say that means that you don't have to compromise on your beliefs or your true values. And you don't have to compromise on maybe your self-expression. Now, that's again because I do believe in courtesy and etiquette that I'm not here to advocate for everyone just throwing things to for the sake of chaos, but it is to be allowed to express their voices and to feel like they're being listened to and that they have the ability to provide and express dissenting thoughts. So many of us, if we are not part of the echo chamber, right, then we're branded a potential troublemaker or someone who's always right raising controversial issues. And it's like, well, that's not a bad thing, but it can be portrayed that way, right? And I know, like I know, Cecilia, you like to push that envelope, but it absolutely always spurs great discussion. And that's the point, right? And that's the point of raising another point of view and adding a different lens to the conversation. So psychological safety is providing that environment where people can feel like they can express things that are different and be themselves. And everyone is unique. I'll just add a quick story because I feel like my upbringing, my childhood, where I am a first generation Chinese American, and my family, my parents and my older sister emigrated from Hong Kong. And we lived in a very diverse community in an area in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area where a lot of diplomats and various embassy families lived, as well as other immigrant families. And so my elementary school was every color of the rainbow, and not just every color, but it was also like seemingly every nationality, and that was just something I understood. Like, hey, uh, Sally's Korean and she's really good with, XYZ, and Shirley's Pakistani and she is already a wonderful pianist. And, Darnell, he's the best athlete, in the class. And it was everyone was accepted for their unique selves. And they could feel like they could bring their unique selves to the classroom because we all weren't trying to hide any part of ourselves, and we weren't trying to make excuses for the things that we weren't good at because we were recognized for the things that we were good at, or where we came from was this interesting new thing, like, oh, that's different from our family, but we understand what it's like to have certain foods or certain customs or whatever that was. And so that was the environment that I grew up in. Like, I just took diversity for granted. I took for granted acceptance of who you were and what you brought to the table as a unique individual. And it wasn't until coming out of that environment when you start to see how things definitely shift. So I'm trying to pull us all back together to that same amazing experience, right? Because again, it's about the experiential um, uh, engagement that we're having, whether with our workplaces or our social communities, et cetera. And so I think about how to build that environment where people feel psychologically safe to be their unique individuals and celebrate their strengths, all of their strengths, and highlight that for again the betterment of the entire association. So that is what drives me into building that psychological safety into our workplace because it's rooted in my own upbringing. Like I know what it's like, and I know that I felt like our classmates felt like we weren't, this minority, group of kids. It's like, no, we were all, and we were all together, and we were all just wonderfully celebrated. And I think that if you haven't had that experience, it's really quite phenomenal.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful experience. And one of the things I like about living in the greater DC area, what we like to call the DMV for DC, Maryland, Virginia, is there are so many different people from so many different places, and it's very cosmopolitan in the best sense of the word. And I really enjoy that. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, which, is a great place to grow up. We all looked alike pretty much, though. And the neighborhood I grew up in, we were mostly white, mostly Catholic. So, like, we all went to the same church, we all went to the same school, so you kind of were around the same people all the time. And it was very difficult to not be forced into a mold for that reason, because I was like, well, we all act this way and we have to behave this way. And yet there was a great sense of interest in learning about people that weren't like us. So
Mhm.
it sounds kind of funny, but we had a Jewish family move into our neighborhood. And everybody's like, oh, did you hear about the Jewish family? And so everybody wanted to meet them and know about them and learn about them. And they even had a Hanukkah party for all the kids in the neighborhood and taught us about Hanukkah. And that was really fun. And no, I don't remember the dreidel song, but we did sing it. So that was really kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then when other people moved into the neighborhood that were not like us, we were like, oh, who are these people? Let's get to meet them too. So it was a little bit different experience because when different unique people moved in, we were interested in like, let's find out who these people are and learn about them because wow, they're different from us because we were all, pretty much the same, Midwesterners, same church, etc. So it was really kind of fun. I have always been that person who asks questions, and no, it hasn't always gone well for me. So I will say that. So I think creating that cosmopolitan state of mind where let's be open to the fact that we might look alike, but we're not exactly alike. Let's listen to these new ideas, our different perspectives, and try to learn from each other and just say that's who that person is. And I think that welcoming mindset is really what we're all looking for. You're right. We all want to belong somewhere. We want a sense of belonging on this big planet because it can, even though it's a planet full of over 8 billion of us, sometimes it gets a little lonely. I think we all know that. So being able to be together like that, I think is great. And I just love that example of your upbringing because it just sounds so fun. I would have had a ball growing up in that environment. I still had fun, but that sounds really interesting to me. Being with all those different kind of people and just saying, hey, yeah, we're different, but yeah, we all still get along. And I love that. And I think that's a lesson that Diane, you could probably translate into the work you do for organizations. Like, how might you help translate that cosmopolitan state of mind to an organization?
So, and I loved your story as well because it proves that you don't have to have a diverse um, group in order to provide that psychological safety, right, to others, to have that welcoming mindset, to have that sense of curiosity. And I think that, the work that I'm doing is helping build those leadership skills in emotional intelligence, right? Having the self-awareness to understand where you are and how you interact and engage with your teams, and having the ability to enhance our our inclusive leadership skills, right? That's the listening, and that's the awareness of our own biases and mitigating those biases, and just improving our communication skills overall to be opening and welcoming and curious rather than right projecting something that might um, inadvertently and unintentionally suppress those different ideas and different opinions. And I think that that's what would really enhance our efforts is, not just making emotional intelligence a nice to have, but it's a must have in our leadership toolbox.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point because I think a lot of us work on our emotional intelligence and we probably don't give ourselves a lot of grace or latitude when we mess up. But emotional intelligence is like intellectual intelligence. We have to work at it, and sometimes we're going to make a mistake, and we're not always going to be, the perfect boss or the perfect teammate. And that may mean making an apology.
Mhm.
It may mean in some instances you have to leave the organization and find a different team because if the culture is that toxic and unwelcoming, or there's barriers to advancement, we do have to move on so that we can grow. And I
Mhm.
think
Yeah.
that the other thing, in addition to the thread about we don't tend to listen to this fantastic staff we spent a lot of time and money putting together, and letting them be our think tank in a lot of ways, what I do see is a stagnancy in how we accept associations and how they run. So, for example, when many years ago I lost my one and only CEO job at an association. And so I started interviewing other CEOs after that
Mhm.
happened. And I was like, well, what advice do you have? What insights do you have? And pretty much everybody said, oh, we all get fired at least once, if not twice. And it's usually not for performance. And I was like, and we accept this? Well, yeah, what are you going to do? That's how boards are. And I think the fact that we just roll over and accept it, that's when you become stagnant. That's when you stop growing, changing, evolving. And I think that's really what associations need to focus on. Jeff DeCania did that year-long study
Mhm.
on the future of association boards, and I was part of that working group with him and a lot of other people. He came out with a very thoughtful paper and action guide, and it was a wonderful tool and great process. But I came away wondering, is anybody actually going to do this?
Yeah.
Are we going to accept it? Are we as a profession going to say, let's do this thing because it's important? And I think until we can start doing that, Diana, saying, let's add emotional intelligence to our toolbox. Let's put that in our, this is one of the characteristics we're looking for in a leader, no matter what level of the organization we're at, whether you're the CEO or you're a new member of the team, maybe starting your career, you want some emotional intelligence for people, and creating that mindset of psychological safety. In the book, The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson, which Cheryl Ronk and I just love this book. It's really great. And we use that in our ethics course. She talks about the fact that this hospital reduced the number of mistakes by making it okay to say that you made one. So if
Right.
you made a mistake, you just come forward and say, I made a mistake. And then it could be addressed. They actually made fewer mistakes, they had more psychological safety. So do you think we could apply that to the association model?
Absolutely. Actually, there's Dr. Brian Sexton might have been behind that study from that book, and thank you for that tip because I'm going to add it to my reading list. That there was a study, a survey that he conducted in the healthcare profession, and it was, about their mental health and well-being in the workplace. And it starts with psychological safety, and then it goes, into other levels like, your local leadership and so on. And I think that I've been looking at that survey and actually saying, well, there's a lot that's actually translatable to our association workplace. So I'll be exploring that actually a lot more and saying, how can we apply this? And it's not a long survey. It's very brief, but it gets to the heart of how, to your point, how the employees feel when they make mistakes and when they want learning opportunities and how do we apply that within the association space. So thank you. I think that that is something I am going to be exploring. And just because it's in the healthcare space doesn't mean it's not applicable to ours.
Yeah, and it's really, and I think you'll take away what Cheryl and I did is there's about 6 steps that
Hmm.
this hospital did that we can easily apply.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd love to have that debrief on the book with you and Cheryl for sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that would be great. Just let me, here we are making our plans here on the show. My mother said it's impolite to talk about things people can't participate in. So we'll take that offline from the show. But Diana, it's been great having you on the show. I hope you'll come back in the future and continue this discussion.
Absolutely.
So I do like to ask my guest. I'm afraid we have to wrap up because I think we know we could go on for another hour or 2 hours about this, just reviewing our profession and how we could improve our teams. We do a lot of good work in the association space, all across the whole entire 501c space, all nonprofits. We do a lot of good things. So I think that's why we are turning our eye internally now to how can we make our culture in our association for our teams, our staff better and more psychologically safe. So I want to thank you for that. And I like to ask my guests, what is the one thought you would like the audience to take away today? And how can they get in touch with you if they want to learn more about this topic or what you do at Great Measure Strategies?
Thank you, Cecilia. I would ask that we all have to start where we are and that let's challenge our own assumptions and what we perceive as the conventional wisdom about what is the value of workforce well-being and question ourselves about whether we should really have to compromise our workplace culture in defining success for the organization. So I'd love us to start doing that own self-examination and self-reflection on that. And you can reach me by finding me on LinkedIn, or you can email dianaleettucker@gmail.com.
Great. Well, thank you again, Diana. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I enjoyed it as well, and I look forward to continuing this conversation online and offline.
Excellent. Thank you. So we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting episode. So if you have not followed us yet or subscribed, please take a moment and do that. We are well past 300 episodes, and there's a reason for that. There's still so much to talk about. So join us in our future episodes. If you would like to find this episode featuring Diana and share it with your friends and colleagues or catch up on our library of episodes, you can go to our website, roguetulips.com, go to the podcast page, and you can see our library and all the places where you can subscribe. And hey, if you want to be a guest on the show, fill out our guest application and let's talk. So if you'd like to learn more about ethics, I've mentioned it a couple times today. So is Diana, the ethical mindset. If you want to learn more about ethics, check out our education page and see our schedule for our ethics course. If you're getting ready for the CAE exam this fall, check out our education page. We'll be posting our new schedule this fall and happy to answer questions offline about that. You also might want to try our CAE practice exam, which was written by Cheryl Bronk. And yes, it's really hard, but it's worthwhile. So check that out. If you'd like to know what's on my mind this week, and like I always say, I don't know what I'm going to talk about either. Check out the blog page and see what I've been pondering and thinking about, and share a comment on the blog page. And if you'd like to know more about how Rogue Tulips Consulting can help your organization bloom outside the box, check out the services page, and then let's have a conversation. We'd love to sit down and talk with you about where you're going with your organization. So that's it for this week. On behalf of Diana and myself, we will see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together.